Have you ever watched a dedicated athlete train hard every single day, following perfect form, doing all the right exercises, never cutting corners, and still end up injured? It's one of the most frustrating things to witness in sports. The training looks textbook, the effort is undeniable, and yet something keeps going wrong. This is not a story about lazy athletes or careless coaches. This is a story about something far more subtle and far more dangerous. The idea that correct training is always safe training. Let's start with a question that rarely gets asked in sports settings. When we talk about the right way to train, right, for whom? Right under what conditions? Right for what state of body and nervous system? Most of what we call correct in sports science is built on average. Data from group studies. It reflects what works for most people, under controlled conditions, at a particular point in their development. But your athlete is not an average. They are an individual, showing up to practice with their own history, their own fatigue levels, their own nervous system, and their own readiness on any given day. Richard Schmidt's schema theory, proposed back in 1975, helped justify repetitive practice as a core training method. The idea is that through repetition, the brain builds generalized motor programs that allow for flexible, skillful movement. That's a solid foundation. But there's a critical condition baked into that theory. The nervous system must be ready to integrate the movement correctly. If it isn't, repetition doesn't refine the skill. It reinforces the error. The athlete doesn't build a clean motor program. They build a flawed one, repeated thousands of times until it becomes automatic. That's the first place where correct training starts to quietly cause damage. Now think about form correction. We've all seen it, a coach pausing practice to adjust an athlete's joint angles, posture, or limb position. It comes from a good place. But Gabrielle Wulf's research in 2007 showed something important when athletes are asked to focus intensely on how their body is moving. What's called internal focus performance and learning actually suffer, compared to focusing on the external result of the movement. When you tell someone to constantly think about where their elbow is, or how their knee is bending, you interrupt the natural flow of movement. The body tightens. Compensation patterns emerge. What you get is a movement that looks correct but doesn't function correctly. There's a difference between reproducing the shape of good form and actually moving well, and here's where it gets particularly painful to watch. The most dedicated, conscientious athletes are the ones most at risk. Rolf Mayosin and colleagues published a comprehensive review in 2013 on overtraining syndrome. They found that high-intensity, high-frequency training without adequate recovery disrupts the nervous system's ability to adapt. The body stops growing from the stimulus. Instead, it starts defending against it. And the athletes most likely to push through that line? The ones who never skip a session. The ones who follow every instruction. The ones who feel guilty if they ease up. These athletes experience a gradual shift. Their movements become heavier. Their reaction times slow. Familiar exercises start producing pain. But because they believe they're doing everything right, they interpret these signals as weakness or laziness, rather than what they actually are, warning signs from a nervous system under too much pressure. The nervous system is, in fact, where all training adaptation begins. Enrico Talaritz and colleagues reported in 2015 that early strength gains from resistance training come primarily from neural adaptation, not muscle growth. The brain learns to recruit motor units more efficiently, more quickly, in better sequence. If the nervous system is fatigued or dysregulated, that learning process breaks down. And when you keep loading a nervous system that can't adapt properly, the body finds workarounds compensating with the wrong muscles, restricting movement at certain joints, offloading stress to structures that weren't designed to carry it. David Anoka showed in 2008 that neuromuscular fatigue doesn't just reduce output, it changes how movement is controlled. The number of available movement strategies decreases. When an athlete is fatigued, they lose the ability to solve movement problems flexibly. They rely on fewer patterns, placing more stress on specific tissues. This is often why the same injury keeps recurring in the same location. The body has learned a movement solution that consistently overloads one area, and it keeps returning to that solution under pressure. Pain itself is not the beginning of the problem. Lorraine Mosley explained in 2007 that pain is the brain's output, a signal that it has judged a situation to be dangerous, not a direct measurement of tissue damage. This means by the time pain appears, the underlying movement dysfunction has often been building for months. Joel Stevenson and colleagues confirmed in 2019 that movement control changes consistently precede the onset of sports injuries. Pain is not the first warning sign. It's often the last one. So what should we be looking for instead? The early signals show up in movement quality, not performance results. A slight hesitation before a direction change. An increasing asymmetry between left and right. A landing that's noisier than it used to be. A movement that used to flow now requiring visible effort. Nikolai Bernstein, the great movement scientist, showed that skilled movement is characterized by flexible use of degrees of freedom, the ability to solve the same problem in slightly different ways each time. When movement becomes rigid and repetitive, when the athlete can only do it one way, that's a sign the nervous system is in protective mode. It's not a sign they need more repetitions. It's a sign they need less demand, not more. Coaches who consistently develop athletes without breaking them share a common approach. They evaluate readiness before they prescribe training. Franz Bosch described in 2015 how warm-up observation watching rhythm, reaction, speed, and left-right differences reveals the nervous system's state. Far better than flexibility tests or strength assessments. Some days the data says this athlete is not ready for precision work today, and the response to that data is to adjust, not to override. The guiding principle in these environments is to reduce demand before reducing quality. Rather than pushing through poor movement patterns at full intensity, they scale back the complexity or speed until the nervous system can organize the movement cleanly. Claudia Wulf and colleagues showed in 2016 that variable practice, slightly changing distances, rhythms, and starting positions produces better long-term motor learning than blocked repetition under identical conditions. Variability trains the system to be adaptable. Identical repetition trains the system to be rigid. And rigidity, in a living body under sport demands, is one step away from breakdown. The failures we see most, often in well-intentioned coaching, follow a clear pattern, assuming that if an athlete can't do something, they just need more volume. Measuring all athletes against the one who's thriving on the current program, correcting form so frequently that athletes lose trust in their own sensory feedback, interpreting effort and sweat as signs of recovery and readiness, and most difficult of all, being unable to stop a practice or lower the load when the evidence calls for it, because it feels like giving up on what's correct. But here's what the research tells us, and what the best coaches understand in their bones training is not about what is theoretically correct. It's about what this body, in this state on this day, can actually absorb and grow from. Correct training applied to an unprepared nervous system doesn't produce growth. It produces a more sophisticated version of dysfunction. The responsibility for making that judgment sits with the adults in the room. Athletes, especially young ones, especially the conscientious ones, will not tell you when something feels wrong. Robert Enright noted in 2016 that athletes withhold reports of pain and discomfort because of psychological pressure and fear of judgment. The culture of toughness that we celebrate in sport actively suppresses the feedback loop that would otherwise keep athletes safe. Changing that culture starts with asking different questions. Not, did you give full effort today? But, how did that movement feel? Not, why couldn't you do it? But, what was your body telling you? Not, we have to get through this session. But what does this athlete need right now? The final message is this. Correct training is not the enemy. The sequence matters. First, evaluate the state of the body. Second, define the purpose of the session. Third, select the tools, the exercises, the drills, the loads that serve that purpose for that body on that day. When you follow that sequence, correct training becomes genuinely powerful. When you skip it, correct training becomes one of the most reliable ways to quietly break the athletes who trust you most. Effort and dedication deserve to be protected, not exploited. The way to honor an athlete's commitment is to make sure the training they pour themselves into is actually building them up, not grinding them down in ways that won't show up until it's too late. If this way of thinking resonates with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the like button. It helps this content reach more coaches and athletes who need it. Thank you for watching.